The massive Zephyrian Council chamber shook as the final Confederate battlecruiser fired up its quantum engines. Elder researcher Minho pressed his palm against the bioglass observation deck, watching the enormous warship slowly turn away from their doomed planet. The vessel's hull gleamed like polished bone in the light of Kepler 442c's dying red sun, its weapon arrays still glowing hot from their recent demonstration of power. "They're really gone," whispered young Sumin, her voice barely cutting through. The constant grinding of their failing atmospheric systems. Her delicate features were pale with exhaustion, and the breathing mask covering half her face was cracked from overuse. Around them, the great chamber that had once hosted peaceful negotiations with dozens of alien species now felt like a tomb. The Confederate fleet had arrived 3 days ago, with enough firepower to glass an entire moon. Admiral Thexvar, a massive, reptilian creature with scales that shifted color with his emotions, had delivered their final judgment through a holographic projection that filled the entire chamber. His forked tongue had tasted the air with satisfaction as he pronounced their death sentence. "The Galactic Confederation has spoken," the Admiral had hissed, his scales turning deep crimson with authority. "Your bioquantum experiments have torn holes in reality itself. The void plague spreads because of your reckless science. You will remain on this quarantine world until either the plague consumes the galaxy or consumes you first." Behind the Admiral's projection, Minho had seen the faces of former allies turned cold with fear. Ambassador Clixoth of the Silicon Collective, whose crystalline form had once sparkled with friendship, now glowed with harsh judgment. The floating gas beings of Nebula Prime, who had visited their world as honored guests just cycles ago, now pulsed with angry reds and oranges through their containment suits. The trial had been a mockery. No evidence was presented. No defense was allowed. The galaxy needed someone to blame for the cosmic horror that was slowly eating their civilization, and the Zephyrians made perfect scapegoats. Their biotechnology was too advanced, too alien, too different from the mechanical systems most species preferred. Minho remembered the day the void plague first appeared. He had been in his laboratory, working on a new strain of healing moss that could regrow damaged organs, when every biosensor in the facility had screamed in unison. Something impossible had happened in the Vega system. An entire star cluster had simply vanished, leaving behind empty space that hurt to look at directly. Within hours, reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The plague wasn't destroying star systems in any conventional sense. It was erasing them from existence, creating wounds in space-time that grew larger with each passing day. Planets, stars, entire civilizations were being swallowed by expanding bubbles of absolute nothingness. That defied every known law of physics. The Zephyrians had immediately offered their help. Their bioquantum computers could process information in ways that mechanical systems couldn't match. Their living sensors could detect energy patterns that traditional instruments missed entirely. For weeks, they had worked alongside the galaxy's greatest minds, trying to understand the impossible phenomenon. But fear made people stupid. When the plague continued to spread despite their efforts, when entire species vanished overnight, the Confederation's leaders needed someone to blame. The Zephyrians' advanced biotechnology became suspicious rather than helpful. Their peaceful nature was seen as weakness rather than wisdom. Now, 3 cycles later, the galaxy's former protectors were dying alone on a poisoned world. Young engineer, Donghyun burst through the chamber doors, his biosuit sparking with electrical damage. Elder Minho, the southern habitat domes have collapsed completely. We've lost life support for nearly 8,000 people. His voice cracked with exhaustion and grief. The bioneural networks are shutting down one by one. Our living computers are starving without the quantum nutrients they need to survive. Around them, the chamber's walls pulsed weakly with bioluminescent light, like a dying heartbeat. The magnificent coral trees that had once provided oxygen and beauty were now brown and brittle, their living circuits failing as the planet's toxic atmosphere seeped through damaged seals. Sumin stumbled to a nearby console, her hands shaking as she activated the emergency systems. "What about the nursery caverns? The children in the growth pods can't survive much longer without proper bio-support. We're trying to consolidate everyone into the central habitat," Dongyun replied, his bioluminescent patches flickering with stress. "But Elder, we don't have enough functional processors to maintain life support for more than another cycle, maybe 2 if we're lucky." Through the observation windows, Minho could see the sprawling Zephyrian city stretched across the valley below. Once it had been a marvel of bioengineering, with living buildings that grew from the ground and adjusted themselves to their inhabitants' needs. Flying creatures that served as public transport had soared between towers that breathed and pulsed with life. Now it looked like a dying organism. Buildings sagged as their living support structures failed. The bioluminescent pathways that had once lit the streets flickered randomly, creating an eerie pattern of light and shadow. In the distance, he could see the massive atmospheric processors, creatures the size of mountains that had once transformed the hostile planet into a garden paradise, struggling to function as their organic components slowly died. With hands that trembled from both age and despair, Minho activated the chamber's central biocomputer. The living machine responded sluggishly, its consciousness dimmed by starvation and neglect. Carefully, he began programming their final message beacon, a small organic probe that could survive in the vacuum of space for decades. "Elder, what are you doing?" Sumin asked, watching him encode their history into the probe's living memory banks. "Recording our truth," Minho whispered, his fingers dancing across the bio-neural interface. "If we must die forgotten, at least the stars will. No, we were healers, not destroyers. Perhaps someday, when the fear passes and wisdom returns, someone will remember the Zephyrians with kindness rather than hatred." The message beacon pulsed with soft blue light, absorbing not just his words, but his memories, his emotions, the true story of their peaceful people, who had wanted nothing more than to help heal a wounded galaxy. "May the stars remember us kindly," he whispered, as the probe launched into the endless void, carrying their final testament to an empty universe that no longer wanted to listen. Outside, their red sun continued its slow journey toward the horizon, painting their dying world in shades of twilight and shadow. The settlement's biodomes flickered like dying fireflies against Kepler 442c's perpetual twilight, their once brilliant glow now reduced to weak pulses of fading light. Engineer Jiwon knelt beside another failed atmospheric processor, her biotools scattered uselessly around the corroded organic circuits that had once pulsed with life. The massive creature-machine hybrid wheezed its final breath, its living, components slowly turning grey and brittle. "How many more can we repair?" asked Hyunwoo, the settlement's remaining medic, his voice hollow with exhaustion. Dark circles ringed his eyes, and his bioluminescent patches had dimmed to almost nothing after 3 cycles of constant work trying to save the dying. "None," Jiwon replied, her voice flat as she ran her hands through her matted hair. "We're down to 12,000 survivors, and these systems weren't designed to run without regular biological matter infusions from off-world. Without the quantum nutrients and living biomass we used to import, our processors are literally starving to death." She gestured helplessly at the massive organic machine behind her, what had once been a beautiful fusion of technology and life. Part computer, part living creature, now looked like a dying whale beached on dry land. Its bio-neural pathways, once glowing with electrical activity, were dark and cold. The breathing vents along its sides barely moved, and the sweet scent of healthy biotechnology had been replaced by the sour smell of decay. 3 cycles of isolation had transformed their once thriving colony into a graveyard of dreams. The Zephyrian settlement that had been home to nearly 50,000 souls now resembled a dying organism. Buildings that had grown from the ground like living trees were withering, their walls cracking as the bio-support structures failed. The flowing walkways that had once carried people smoothly between levels now lay still and cracked, their organic transport systems long dead. Each day brought new system failures, new deaths, new reasons to abandon hope. The food production centers had failed first, their delicate biogardens unable to survive without proper atmospheric control. Then the water purification systems had collapsed, forcing the survivors to rely on emergency reserves that wouldn't last much longer. Now even the basic life support was failing, and the toxic atmosphere of Kepler 442c was slowly seeping into their living spaces. Hyunwoo watched as another group of survivors carried stretchers through the failing corridors. "We lost 16 more yesterday," he said quietly. "The children are struggling the most. Their biosystems need more nutrients than the adults, and we just don't have enough to go around." In the distance, they could hear the constant sound of emergency alarms as another section of the city went dark. The bioluminescent streetlights that had once made their settlement look like a constellation of stars were blinking out one by one, leaving entire districts in perpetual darkness. Ji-won stood up, wiping her hands on her torn work clothes. "I've been thinking about the old stories," she said, staring out at the dying city. "Remember how our ancestors used to tell tales about the legendary bioships that could heal themselves? Ships that were part machine, part living creature, that could survive anything the universe threw at them? Those were just stories," Hyunwoo replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe," Ji-won said, "but right now I'd give anything for one of those legendary ships to appear and save us." As if summoned by her words, young researcher Daeun burst into the chamber, her scanner device blinking frantically with readings that shouldn't have been possible. Her breathing was rapid with excitement and fear, and her biopatches were flashing bright orange with alarm. "Elder Minho," she called out, her voice echoing through the failing corridors. "Long-range sensors are detecting something. Impossible. Ships approaching our position." The aging elder emerged from his meditation chamber, his movements slow and careful. His once proud bioluminescent patches had faded to barely visible glimmers, and his breathing was labored from the increasingly toxic air. "What kind of ships, child?" he asked, though his voice carried little hope. Minho's patches flickered with confusion as he studied Daeun's scanner readings. "Confederate vessels coming to finish us off?" "No, sir." Daeun's voice trembled with disbelief as she stared at the impossible data streaming across her bioscanner. "These signatures don't match any known Confederation technology. They're primitive, really primitive. Ancient fusion drives and chemical propulsion systems, the kind of technology most species abandoned thousands of cycles ago." The small group of survivors gathered around the scanner, their faces reflecting a mixture of hope and fear. The readings showed at least 12 vessels approaching their world, but the energy signatures were unlike anything in their databases. Instead of the clean quantum drives used by Confederation ships, these vessels relied on crude fusion reactors and chemical rockets that should have been museum pieces. Hyunwoo frowned as he studied the data. "Could it be pirates, scavengers coming to pick through our ruins?" "Or maybe," Ji-won said quietly, "it's someone the Confederation never bothered to contact, someone too primitive for their perfect galactic society." Elder Minho's eyes widened as understanding dawned on his weathered face. "The Outer Rim territories," he whispered. "There are species out there the Confederation never accepted, races they considered too backward, too violent, too primitive to join their perfect union." As they watched, the scanner showed the mysterious fleet dropping out faster than light travel at the edge of their star system. The ships were moving cautiously, their primitive sensors probably struggling to understand what they were seeing. But they were still coming, still approaching a quarantine world that every civilized species in the galaxy had marked as forbidden. "Whoever they are," Daeun said, her voice filled with wonder, "they're not afraid of the quarantine. They're not afraid of us." Outside, the red sun of Kepler 442c continued its slow journey across the sky. But for the first time in 3 cycles, the dying Zephyrians felt something they had almost forgotten: hope. Someone was coming. Someone who didn't know or didn't care about the Confederation's fears and prejudices. In the distance, more biodomes flickered and died, but the survivors no longer watched them with despair. Instead, they turned their faces toward the stars, waiting to see who would emerge from the primitive ships that dared to approach their dying world. The answer would change everything they thought they knew about civilization, courage, and what it truly meant to be advanced. Captain Sunho Kim pressed his weathered hands against the viewport of his cargo hauler, Rising Phoenix, watching the dying Zephyrian settlement sprawl across the valley below. The alien city looked like a massive organism in its death throes, bioluminescent domes flickering weakly against the perpetual twilight, organic towers sagging as their living support structures failed. It reminded him too much of Earth's final days. Behind him, a ragtag fleet of human refugee ships drifted in formation, their hulls scarred from months of desperate travel through hostile space. The converted cargo haulers, mining vessels, and passenger liners carried the last remnants of humanity. 30,000 souls who had escaped Earth's destruction with nothing but stubborn determination and an unshakable refusal to give up. "Sir," Communications Officer Una called out from her station, her voice tight with concern. "We're receiving a transmission from the surface. They're asking us to leave before we get infected with whatever killed their people." Sunho's jaw tightened as memories flooded back. 6 months ago, Earth had been consumed by the same void plague that was slowly devouring the galaxy. The cosmic horror had appeared without warning, erasing entire continents from existence, leaving behind wounds in reality that hurt to look at directly. Humanity had fled in whatever ships they could find, desperately seeking refuge among the stars. But every port had turned them away, every species had rejected them. The Galactic Confederation had declared humans too primitive to join their perfect union, too violent and backward to deserve help. Even as Earth died behind them, not a single alien world had offered sanctuary to the human refugees. "They think we're going to abandon them like everyone else did to us," Sunho muttered, studying the failing alien settlement through his binoculars. He could see figures moving between the dying structures, tall, graceful beings with patches of light flickering along their bodies. Even from this distance, he could tell they were exhausted, desperate, probably starving. "Captain," called out his chief engineer Min-Su from the engine room through the intercom. "The fleet's asking for orders. Some of the ship captains are getting nervous about approaching a quarantine world. They're worried about contamination." "Tell them we didn't come this far to turn away from people who need help," Sunho replied firmly. "Una, open a channel to the surface." The main view screen crackled to life, revealing the haggard features of an elderly alien whose bioluminescent patches barely glowed with exhaustion. The creature's large eyes were filled with a mixture of hope and despair that Sunho recognized all too well. "Unknown vessels," the alien said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had watched his people die. "This world is under quarantine by order of the Galactic Confederation. For your own safety, you must depart immediately. We do not wish to see others suffer as we have." Sunho stepped forward, his reflection joining the aliens on the split screen. "Elder," he replied, his voice steady despite the emotion churning in his chest. "I'm Captain Kim of the human refugee fleet. We know about abandonment. We know about being left to die alone while the galaxy turns its back. But nobody, and I mean nobody, dies alone on our watch." The alien's bioluminescent patches suddenly pulsed with shock, brightening for the first time in the conversation. "Humans? But your species was deemed too primitive to join the Confederation. You lack faster-than-light communication, quantum processing, bioneural networks. How did you even find us?" Behind Sunho, Navigator Ji-hoon spoke up. "We've been following the Void Plague's path, sir, looking for other survivors, other outcasts. When we detected your settlement's biosignatures, we knew we'd found people who needed help. Lucky for you," Sunho smiled grimly at the alien elder, "that we're too primitive for the Confederation, because that means we don't follow their heartless rules about quarantines and abandonment." Through the view screen, Sunho could see other aliens gathering behind their elder, their faces showing a mixture of disbelief and desperate hope. Children pressed close to adults, their small faces thin with hunger. Medical personnel moved between stretchers carrying the sick and wounded. "Captain Kim," the elder said slowly, "I am Minho, last remaining council member of the Zephyrian settlement. We have been isolated here for 3 cycles, abandoned by those we once called friends. Our biotechnology is failing without proper resources. We number only 12,000 now, down from 50,000. Why would you risk your people's lives for strangers?" Sunho's expression hardened as he remembered watching Earth's final broadcast. Billions of voices crying out for help, as reality itself unraveled around them, while the galaxy's advanced civilizations turned away in fear and disgust. "Because 6 months ago we were in your exact position," Sunho replied. "Earth was dying, consumed by the same plague that probably brought you here. We begged every species in the galaxy for help, for sanctuary, for even basic supplies. You know what we got? Closed doors and lectures about how primitive we were. Through the view screen he could see Minho's patches flickering with understanding and shared pain. The Confederation left us to die, Sunho continued, his voice growing stronger. Just like they left you. But we survived because we refused to give up, and because we still believe that no sentient being should die alone and forgotten. We may not have your biotechnology or quantum drives, but we've got something the advanced galaxy seems to have lost: basic decency. Young engineer, Hyunji burst onto the bridge, her tablet showing scans of the planet below. Captain, their atmospheric processes are failing catastrophically. Those people have maybe days before their life support completely collapses. Then we'd better get to work, Sunho said, turning back to the view screen. Elder Minho, we're coming down. Our ships may be primitive by Confederation standards, but our engineers are stubborn, our doctors don't give up, and we've got enough spare parts and determination to keep your people alive. Minho's bioluminescent patches began glowing brighter, hope kindling in his ancient eyes for the first time in cycles. Captain Kim, you would risk everything for people you've never met? Elder, Sunho replied with a smile that held both sadness and fierce determination. That's what makes us human. The human cargo bay of the Rising Phoenix buzzed with incredible activity. As Dr. Nari Park worked alongside Zephyrian biotechnician Jae-hyun, their unlikely partnership creating miracles that neither species could have imagined alone. The massive cargo hold had been transformed into a workshop where human engineering met alien biotechnology in ways that defied every scientific principle both cultures had once believed. If we route the fusion plasma through your biocircuits like this, Nari explained, her oil-stained hands deep inside a hybrid machine that pulsed with both electrical current and organic life, we can extend your atmospheric processes' operational life by decades instead of days. The device before them was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, part human fusion reactor, part living Zephyrian organism. Steel conduits merged seamlessly with organic neural pathways that glowed soft blue with bioelectrical activity. The machine actually breathed, its chest-like panels rising and falling as it processed both mechanical energy and biological nutrients. Jae-hyun's bioluminescent patches flared with amazement as he watched human plasma conduits integrate perfectly with his people's living circuits. Your people's willingness to sacrifice critical ship components for complete strangers. It defies every logical behavioral model in our databases. These fusion reactors are your lifeline to survival in space. Logic's overrated, grunted Chief Mechanic Tae-hyun, sweat pouring down his face as he carefully welded human steel supports to delicate Zephyrian biometal structures. The biometal actually tried to help, shifting and flowing around his welding torch like it understood what he was trying to accomplish. Sometimes you just shut up and do what's right. Consequences be damned. Around them, the workshop hummed with impossible combinations of technology. Human engineers had torn apart their own ship's life support systems to provide raw materials for the dying Zephyrian processors. Spare parts from mining equipment were being integrated with alien biocomputers that processed information like living brains. Emergency medical supplies were being used to feed starving organic circuits that had been without proper nutrients for cycles. Young human engineer Soo-young carefully adjusted a bio-neural interface while Zephyrian technician Woo-jin guided her hands with gentle precision. Your circuits think, she marveled, as the living machine responded to her touch. They're actually making decisions about how to optimize their own performance. And your machines never give up, Woo-jin replied, his patches flickering with wonder. Even when their components fail, they keep trying to function. It's like they have the same stubborn spirit as their creators. Outside the cargo bay, the transformation of the Zephyrian settlement was nothing short of miraculous. Human construction crews worked alongside alien researchers, their combined efforts breathing new life into dying structures. The biodomes, that had flickered like dying embers, were now glowing brightly again, powered by hybrid systems that merged human fusion technology with Zephyrian biological processes. In the settlement's central plaza, Something beautiful was happening that would have been impossible just days before. Human children and young Zephyrians played together in the restored biogardens, their laughter echoing through chambers that had known only despair and death for 3 long cycles. The human kids were fascinated by their alien friends' glowing patches, while the Zephyrian youngsters marveled at human toys and games that relied on simple mechanical principles rather than bio-neural interfaces. "Look, Isul," called out a young Zephyrian named Cuban, his patches bright with excitement as he showed off a human toy airplane. "It flies without any bio-circuits at all, just moving air over shaped wings." 8-year-old Isul grinned as she watched the paper plane soar across the dome. "And look at this," she replied, gently touching one of the bioluminescent flowers that had begun blooming again in the restored gardens. The flower responded to her presence, its petals shifting color from blue to warm gold. "It knows I'm here. It's like it's happy to meet me." The success of their partnership was beyond anything either species had dreamed possible. Human doctors worked with Zephyrian healers to develop new treatments that combined mechanical medicine with biological healing. Engineers from both species collaborated on designs that would have been considered impossible just weeks before. But their peaceful cooperation was about to be tested. The alert sirens began wailing across the settlement as long-range sensors detected incoming ships. Captain Sunho rushed to the command center, where the displays showed 3 sleek Confederate vessels dropping out of hyperspace at the system's edge. "Those are Confederation scout cruisers," Elder Minho said grimly, his patches dimming with fear. "They've come to check on the quarantine. When they see humans here, they'll call for reinforcements." Within minutes, the human refugee fleet had moved into defensive formation around Kepler 442c, their primitive but determined vessels forming a protective barrier between the planet and the approaching Confederate ships. The contrast was stark. Sleek alien warships with quantum weapons facing down converted cargo haulers and mining ships held together with determination and spare parts. Unknown vessels. The Confederate Admiral's transmission crackled across all frequencies, his reptilian voice dripping with authority and disgust. "You are violating galactic quarantine protocols and interfering with Confederation justice. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." Captain Sunho stepped onto his bridge, his crew gathering around him with grim determination. Through the viewports, they could see the Confederate ships advancing, their weapon systems powering up with ominous energy signatures. "Negative, Admiral," Sunho replied calmly, his voice carrying across the communication channels to every ship in both fleets. "These people are under human protection now. They've committed no crimes except having the wrong kind of technology when you needed someone to blame. You want them, you come through us." The Confederate Admiral's laughter was cold and mocking. "How you primitives dare to threaten the Confederation Navy? Your crude ships are no match for our quantum weapons and dimensional shields." "Maybe not," Sunho admitted, his hand resting on the weapons console. "But here's the thing about us primitives. We're too stupid to know when we're beaten, and too stubborn to care." Behind him, the human fleet held its formation, ready to fight. Impossible odds to protect people they barely knew. In the settlement below, humans and Zephyrians worked side by side, proving that the galaxy's future lay not in the sterile perfection of the Confederation, but in the messy, beautiful chaos of cooperation between different species who chose to care about each other. The Confederate ships hesitated, their scanners probably reading the impossible determination radiating from the human fleet. After several tense minutes, they began to withdraw, unwilling to engage vessels they considered too primitive to pose a real threat. They had no idea that desperation and determination often trumped advanced technology, and that the primitive humans had just changed the galaxy forever. 2 years after first contact, the Kepler 442c colony had transformed into something that defied every expectation the galaxy had ever held about cooperation between species. What had once been a dying settlement of desperate refugees was now a thriving metropolis that showcased the incredible potential of Zephyrian-human hybrid technology. The city sprawled across the valley like a living organism made of both metal and flesh. Towering biomechanical structures rose toward the red sky, their walls breathing with organic life, while fusion reactors hummed in their steel hearts. Transportation tubes that pulsed like arteries carried people between buildings that grew and adapted to their inhabitants' needs. Gardens flourished on every level, where earth flowers bloomed alongside alien bioluminescent plants that painted the twilight in impossible colors. Elder Minho stood in the magnificent new council chamber, its walls alive with bioneural networks that displayed real-time data from across their growing civilization. Before him sat a mixed crowd of humans and Zephyrians, their faces reflecting the hope and determination that had built this impossible dream together. Beside him, Captain Sunho wore the silver insignia of their newly formed alliance, a symbol that combined human engineering with Zephyrian bioartistry. "My friends," Minho announced, his bioluminescent patches glowing bright blue with pride and joy, "today marks a historic moment for both our species. We launch our first joint exploration vessel, a ship that represents everything we've accomplished, together and everything we hope to achieve." Through the chamber's transparent bio-walls, they could see the massive shipyard where their newest creation waited for launch. The vessel was a masterpiece of hybrid technology, its hull grown from living Zephyrian biometal that could repair itself, powered by human fusion drives that would never tire, guided by bioneural computers that could think and dream. The ship's second chance will carry our message to every corner of the galaxy, Sunho added, his voice carrying the same stubborn determination that had brought them together. No one fights alone, no one dies forgotten, no one gets abandoned just because they're different. In the Launch Control Center, young Dayun worked alongside human engineer Ji-hoon, their partnership a perfect example of how the two species had learned to complement each other's strengths. Dayun's intuitive understanding of bio-neural systems merged seamlessly with Ji-hoon's mechanical precision, creating launch sequences that were both art and science. "Bio-neural networks are responding beautifully," Dayun reported, her patches flickering with concentration as she communed with the ship's living computer systems. "The ship is actually excited about its first mission. I can feel its eagerness through the neural link." "Fusion drives are at optimal power," Ji-hoon replied, his hands dancing over controls that combined human engineering with organic interfaces. "All mechanical systems are green. She's ready to show the galaxy what we can accomplish together." Around them, children from both species pressed against the viewing windows, their faces filled with wonder as they watched the sleek vessel prepare for launch. Human kids stood beside young Zephyrians, chattering excitedly in a mixture of languages and bioluminescent signals that had become their shared way of communication. "Look how pretty it is," exclaimed young Minji, a human girl whose best friend was a Zephyrian named Seungmin. "It's like a spaceship, and a whale had the most beautiful baby ever." Seungmin's patches sparkled with laughter at his friend's description. "My biosensors say the ship is happy too. It wants to explore, to find others who need help like we did." Dr. Nari approached the main viewing window, where her longtime research partner Jae-hyun stood recording the historic moment with both mechanical cameras and bio-neural memory devices. Their work together had revolutionized medicine for both species, combining human surgical techniques with Zephyrian biological healing in ways that seemed magical. "Funny how things worked out," Nari mused, watching the countdown displays as they approached launch time. "We were rescued by the species everyone in the galaxy thought was too primitive to matter, too violent, too backward, too different to ever contribute anything meaningful to galactic civilization. And we were saved by the beings everyone assumed were too alien to understand," Jae-hyun replied, his patches pulsing with gentle colors as he preserved the moment in living memory. "Perhaps the galaxy's greatest weakness was never seeing the strength that comes from unity between different peoples." The launch sequence reached its climax as the second chance lifted gracefully from its biomechanical cradle. Its living hull shifted and flowed as it adjusted to the stresses of flight, while fusion flames painted the twilight sky in brilliant orange and blue. The ship was beautiful in a way that neither purely human nor purely Zephyrian technology could have achieved. Organic curves merged with mechanical precision, creating something entirely new. As the vessel climbed toward the stars, its bio-neural transmitters began broadcasting their message across every frequency the galaxy used. For communication. The words were simple but carried the weight of absolute conviction. You are not alone. The Alliance remembers the forgotten, protects the abandoned, and stands with those who have nowhere else to turn. Elder Minho watched the ship disappear into hyperspace, its wake disturbing the fabric of space-time as it carried their message to distant worlds. Around him, humans and Zephyrians worked side by side, their combined technologies creating wonders that amazed both species daily. The most advanced civilizations, he said quietly to Captain Sunho, are not those with the most powerful weapons or the fastest ships. They're the ones who never forget their compassion, who never stop believing that every life has value. In the weeks that followed, their message began reaching the forgotten corners of the galaxy. Ships started arriving at Kepler 442c, refugee vessels carrying survivors from a dozen different species that the Confederation had deemed too primitive, too dangerous, or too different to deserve help. Each arrival brought new knowledge, new perspectives, new possibilities for what civilization could become when it was built on cooperation rather than exclusion.